Hey guys, welcome back. I am Ashish and this is the second session of FW Taylor. If you have not watched the first session, please go ahead and watch that. The link for the same would be in the description. So continuing from the previous session, other important concerns of FW Taylor. So first important concern that we'll deal with is mental revolution. We have dealt with this in our third principle of scientific management. If you remember, the third principle talked about bringing together the science of work and scientifically selected workmen, and that required mental revolution on behalf of both the workmen and management. We'll see what this means now. Taylor was of the view that scientific management requires a great revolution that takes place in the mental attitude of both management as well as the worker. So there was some mental revolution required, revolution that takes place in the mental attitude. There was a change in mental attitude required of both managers and workers. Instead of focusing more on division of surplus, they should together turn their attention towards increasing the size of the surplus. So division of profit should not be the focus, increasing the profit should be the focus. What this will achieve is, until the surplus becomes so large that it becomes unnecessary to quarrel over how it should be divided. So instead of fighting over how the profits or surplus should be divided, we should focus on increasing the size of the surplus, increasing the size of the profits, so that it becomes immaterial, it becomes unnecessary to quarrel over how it should be divided. Once the surplus increases, there is an ample scope for increasing the wages of the workers and increasing profits of the management. तो आप वर्कर की वेजेस भी बढ़ा सकते हो, मैनेजमेंट की प्रॉफिट्स भी बढ़ा सकते हो once you have increased the surplus. It is along this line a complete change in mental attitude of both sides is required. This is how a mental revolution as envisaged by Taylor works. There is a change in mental attitude required by both worker and management. They have to work together instead of always opposing to each other, instead of creating strikes, instead of managers always opposing the workers. They should always work together and increase their profits. It is along this line that a complete change in their mental attitudes is required. It demands the realization of the fact that their mutual interest is not antagonistic. They have the same mutual interest. They should realize this, that their mutual interest is not antagonistic and mutual prosperity is possible only through mutual cooperation. So in short, there should be harmony, there should not be discord, there should be cooperation between managers and workers. This is what it basically means. Taylor believed that there is no conflict in interest of employees, workers and consumers. Basically the interest of everyone, the employees, the workers, the managers, the consumers, everyone's interest is same. There is no conflict in interest. So as long as we realize that, we will always work efficiently. His major concern was that the results of higher productivity should equally benefit the employer, worker and the consumer. So it is along these lines that a mental attitude change is required, a mental revolution is needed. This is the concept of mental revolution. I hope it is clear. Mental revolution is nothing but a change in mental attitude which is required by both management and workers, because now they are adopting new scientific principles, right? New scientific rules and principles. They are rejecting their old rule of thumb methods and everything. So they require a mental attitude to adopt to this new change. So this is what is mental revolution. Second important concern as raised by Taylor is functional foremanship. What functional foremanship is? Taylor is critical of linear system of organization. What is linear system? Each worker is subordinated to only one boss. Every worker has only one boss. This is the linear system. He replaced this system with what is called functional foremanship. He said that every worker should have 8 bosses. In functional foremanship, the worker receives orders from 8 different specialized supervisors. Every worker should have 8 bosses, and these 8 bosses should be specialized in their own fields. Thus he divided the work not only among the workers but also at the supervisory level. He said that even the supervisor should have division of work. There should be 8 specialized supervisors for each and every worker. How this looks is, there is a factory manager. Below the factory manager are 2 people. One is planning in charge and another one is production in charge. What does planning in charge do? He is responsible for planning. He is the planning in charge, so he is responsible for planning. He sits in the planning room. This is the planning in charge. What does production in charge do? He is responsible for execution because he is the production in charge. So he is responsible for execution and he serves on the shop floor. What is the shop floor? The lowest level where the workers work. So production in charge serves on the shop floor. Planning in charge sits in the planning room. He is responsible for planning. Now planning in charge is again divided into four bosses. One is root clerk, one is instruction clerk, one is time and cost clerk, another one is shop disciplinarian, and production in charge is again divided into four bosses. One is gang boss, repair boss, speed boss, and inspector. These are the 8 names of bosses that F.W. Taylor has given us. These are the names given by F.W. Taylor himself. These 8 names, 8 bosses, and these 8 bosses will now direct one worker below them. So there is one worker and there are 8 bosses which give him directions. So each and every worker is being directed by 8 bosses or 8 specialized supervisors. Thus Taylor divided the work not only among the workers but also at the supervisory level. So moving ahead with our functional foremanship, through this system Taylor wanted to create the narrowly specialized supervisor. So every supervisor was specialized in his task. As you can see, repair boss, there is a speed boss, there is an inspector which will inspect. So every supervisor was specialized in his task. There is a time and cost clerk, there is a root clerk, there is an instruction clerk. So there are specialized supervisors for each type of skilled work. He thought that this will result in efficiency rather than one supervisor looking after all the activities. So specialization of work will be achieved. If one supervisor looks after all the activities, it will not be so specialized. If there are 8 specialized supervisors, then there will be efficiency because each will be looking to his own kind of work. He further believed that in this type of organization, a foreman can be trained quickly and specialization became easy. The worker, the foreman, the worker can be trained quickly because each and every boss gives him specialized instructions, right? So specialization becomes easy and foreman can be trained quickly. This is nothing but functional foremanship as envisaged by F.W. Taylor. Now this has some inherent conflicts. We will see this in criticism part, but as of now this is what functional foremanship means. Moving on to our other concern, time and motion studies. So what are time and motion studies? These were created by F.W. Taylor to prevent soldiering phenomenon. We have already seen soldiering phenomenon. It is nothing but working below the capacity. So for overcoming soldiering phenomenon, he developed something known as time and motion studies. So what is motion study? It is a technique to standardize work methods. There is a method for each work, right? So standardize work methods. It involves observation of all motions comprised in a particular job. In a particular job there are motions, hand motions, leg motions and bodily motions. So observation of all motions comprised in a particular job and then determination of the best set of motions. Thus it is designed to determine a preferable work method with consideration to tools and equipment, raw materials, hand and body motion and so on. So what this means is, we'll see this as an example in future slides, but what this means is all your tools should be standardized. If you are doing something, there should be a particular tool for doing it. You should not be using any random other tool. So there should be a standardized tool, there should be standardized raw material for producing anything, there should be standard hand and body motions. So these are nothing but motion study. This all comprises under motion study. In brief, it is meant to find out one best way to do the job by eliminating unnecessary and slow motions. So you eliminate all the slow motions and unnecessary motions, so what you have at the last is one best way to complete that task. So this is nothing but motion study. Another thing is time study. Time study is used to determine the standard time for completion of work. We have already discussed this in smaller detail in our previous slides. What you have to do is observe the completion of work time that is required. So it facilitates the planning of a large daily task. If there is a large daily task, you observe the time required to complete that work. So this is nothing but time study. Time study and motion study go hand in hand. They are not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand and are performed at the same time. Use of stopwatch is essential in the time study. Stopwatch is used in time study. This is pretty straightforward. With the help of time study and motion study, it is possible to perform a particular task with lesser movements or motions. So when you have studied all the motions, when you have standardized your hand motions, body motions, when you have standardized your tools, your raw materials, when you have come out with a time study, optimum time to complete the task, when you have all such scientific results in your hand, so what will happen is you will perform a particular task with lesser movements and motions, and that task will become more effective. This is the basic crux of time and motion study, to make the task more effective and make it more productive. I hope you understand this, time and motion studies. Another concern is differential piece rate plan. In our initial slides we had seen that Taylor wrote a book on a piece rate system, right? So we'll deal about that in detail here. What did he mean by a piece rate plan? Taylor suggested that pay by piece rates. There should be payment by or wages by piece rates on the basis of the standards set by time and motion studies. So in time and motion studies you have identified all the motions and the optimum time, right? So on the basis of the standards set by those time and motion studies, there should be payment by piece rates, and hence this plan was known as differential piece rate plan. What this means is workers are paid a low piece rate up to a standard, a large bonus at the standard, and a high piece rate above the standard. What happens here is a work or a daily task is divided into different pieces, okay, and there are various piece rates. So if you achieve a low piece rate, you will get a particular payment. If you achieve a standard piece rate, if you have achieved 100% completion of task, you will get a large bonus on completion of that standard. And if you are above the piece rate, if you are above the standard of the piece rate, if you have a high piece rate, you will get a high payment or a high wage. So this is what is meant by differential piece rate plan. Every worker should not be paid equally. If you remember, there should be payments to people and not position, is what we discussed in one of our previous slides. There should be payment to people and not positions. So if two people at the same position are performing differently, one is performing good and one is performing bad, so one who is performing good should be paid more and one who is performing bad should be paid less. So this is nothing but differential piece rate plan. Up to a standard you are given a low piece rate, at the standard you are given a bonus, and if you are above the standard you are giving a high piece rate. Obviously this plan of payment makes workers put forth their best efforts, because everyone wants high payment, right? So they will obviously put forth their best efforts, and this is how efficiency will increase. Taylor said that the piece rate, by virtue of being direct and quick, is more effective than the profit sharing plan in motivating the workers. So if you have to motivate the workers, increase their payments instead of increasing the profits of the company, increase the payments. This is more effective in motivating the workers. He suggested that a worker who, after scientific selection, training and development, a worker who is unable or unwilling to produce the standard, that worker should be removed. If he is not able to achieve a particular standard, that worker should be gotten rid of. That is what he meant by right person for right job, right? This is nothing but the differential piece rate plan. Exception principle. This is another concept put forth by Taylor. Exception principle, what he says is, it involves setting up of a large daily task by the management. We have seen this. A management sets up a large daily task with reward for achieving targets and penalty for not meeting it. Obviously we have seen this in differential piece rate plan. There were rewards for achieving the targets and penalty for not meeting it. Taylor suggested that the manager should not be interested in the items that are at standard performance, but should be concerned mostly with exceptional items that vary from standard performance. So the basic focus of every manager and every management authority should not be achieving the standard, output. It should be going above and beyond the standard output. It should be exceptional items. The focus of the manager should be on exceptional items that vary from the standard performance. So this is what he means by exception principles. Another concept as put forth by Taylor is standardization of tools. Taylor maintained that in addition to determining the best methods, the management should also standardize the tools. The standardization of tools and methods should also be done by management in the light of the needs of specific job. He gives an example for this. In an experiment at Bethlehem Steelworks. Bethlehem Steelworks is a company or a factory. He did an experiment in Bethlehem Steelworks. So in an experiment at Bethlehem Steelworks on shoveling of coal, the experiment was on shoveling of coal. Taylor found out that the average shovel load varied from 16 to 38 pounds. One person shoveled 16 pounds of coal, another person shoveled 20 pounds, another person shoveled 38 pounds of coal. So Taylor found that the average shovel load varied from 16 to 38 pounds. Good workers were able to shovel more tons per day if they used a shovel carrying a load of 21 to 22 pounds. So there were various kinds of shovels, right? So if a shovel is made to carry 21 to 22 pounds, and if a good worker is using such a shovel, he was able to shovel more tons per day. This was one of the findings by Taylor. With different types of materials to be shoveled, like shoveling of coal, shoveling of pig iron, shoveling of sand. So with different types of materials to be shoveled, about 15 different types of shovels were needed. This was the conclusion that Taylor came upon. From then on, when workers arrived in the morning, they received written instructions on what to shovel and what type of shovel to be used. So what Taylor did was he standardized the tools. I hope you are getting this. He standardized the tools. He did an experiment and he came to a conclusion, and from then on, when workers arrived in the morning, they received written instructions on what to shovel, what they have to shovel, and if they have to shovel coal, use this type of shovel. If you have to shovel pig iron, use this type of shovel. If you have to shovel sand, use this type of shovel. So every kind of shoveling was associated with a different kind of shovel. So this is how he standardized the tools. After 3.5 years, 140 men were doing the work formerly handled by 400 to 600 workers. I hope you understand how efficiency has increased by adopting scientific rules, standardization of tools, right? After 3.5 years, he found that 140 men were doing the work formerly handled by 400 to 600 workers. This is the crux of scientific management: increasing the efficiency, increasing the productivity. So 140 men were handling the work of 600 men. This shows that by using a proper instrument for each type of work, we can achieve more work with the help of less number of workers. So obvious, right? Moving ahead. Work as an individual activity. As I have already discussed in my previous slides, Taylor was always opposed to any kind of group activity. He was in favor of cooperation between workers and management, but he was against the team activity or the group activity. He always favored work as an individual activity because he believes that people are motivated by personal ambition, and that once put into a group, the individual loses his individual drive. This is what he believed. As we have already seen in our previous slides, he believed in a concept of economic man, that is, the man is basically motivated only by money. So what he says here is people lose the individual drive when they are put in groups, and they are basically motivated by money. They are basically motivated by personal ambition and self-interest. He believes that the influence of the group makes one produce less. Further, he argued that female workers were more prone to such personal pressures, and indeed separated them in such a way that verbal interaction was impossible. So he was completely against the idea of group activity. Understand this. He was in favor of cooperation between workers and management, but he was completely against the idea of group activity. So moving ahead, other concept related to Taylor is of trade unions. Since Taylor was critical of group activity, he was also against trade union movement, because trade unionism is nothing but group activity, right? So he was against the group activity. He was also against the trade union movement. He regarded trade unions as unnecessary under his system of work. Under scientific management, Taylor said that trade unions are unnecessary. They are a waste of time. The employer, according to him, was on the same side of the workers. He said that the employer was on the same side of the workers, and hence there is no need of trade unions, because employer and workers are on the same side. The goal of the workers and the employees is the same. We have seen this in our previous slides. Taylor suggested that the goals of workers and employees are the same. Acceptance of scientific management principles would reduce conflict among workers, and that is why trade unions are not necessary. Since management itself laid down what was the fair day's pay, or job clarity was done by management for fair day's work through objective rational means, the need for trade unions does not arise. What do trade unions do? They negotiate on behalf of workers for better work conditions, right? So what Taylor says, that since management themselves arrive at fair day's pay and fair day's work after objective and scientific and rational means, so there is no need for trade unions to negotiate, and that is why he considered trade unions to be unnecessary under scientific management. Now there were certain followers of Taylor, as we have seen in one of our previous slides of how scientific management became movement. We have seen that there were certain followers of Taylor. Now we'll study about these followers: Henry Gantt, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, and Maurice L. Cook. So Henry L. Gantt is one of the followers of Taylor. He improved the task and bonus system of incentive pay. What was this system? It was a system where the worker is given a bonus when he reaches the standard, if you remember this. So he improved the system. He also emphasized on the habits of industry. He said that every industry should have some good habits. This is nothing but another name for principles and rules of industry that every industry should follow. So Henry L. Gantt said that there should be habits of industry. He said that organizations should develop certain habitual ways of doing things. Hence the management should set up good habits in the initial stages. So there should be some habitual ways, there should be some predefined rules and principles of doing things in every industry, and these rules and principles should be good. So there should be habits of industry, and management should set up good habits in the initial stages. He emphasized the need for harmonious cooperation between management and labor. As you can see, harmonious cooperation between management and labor. He designed a chart on which the progress of work could be plotted continuously against time. This chart came to be known as Gantt chart. If you are an engineer, you might be very familiar with Gantt chart. Engineers have used this in engineering at some point or the other. So Gantt chart, this is what Gantt chart looks like. So as you can see, there is a task name. A, B, C, D, E, F, G are the tasks of a work. A work is divided into different tasks A, B, C, D, and this task A is given 4 days time. As you can see, from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days time from Monday to Thursday. This is how Gantt chart looks like. Task B overlaps task A. It is from Monday to next Monday. So this is how Gantt chart looks like. Progress of work could be plotted continuously against time. This is what is Gantt chart. It is a very effective tool in plotting the progress of your work. A work can be divided into tasks, and every task can be taken care of. It served as a planning and controlling device. So if you have used Gantt chart in your life at any point of time, you should thank F.W. Taylor or more Henry Gantt for that. Next we'll learn about are Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. These are also the followers of F.W. Taylor, and these are the husband and wife duo. Frank Gilbreth and Lillian Gilbreth are husband and wives. They invented the flow process chart or the flow chart. If you are familiar with flow chart, thank Gilbreth for that. So they invented the flow process chart to help in elimination of unnecessary steps in operation. So as you might already know, if you have used flow charts helps in elimination of unnecessary steps in any kind of work. So they invented the flow charts, hence their system is also known as speed work. They laid the foundation of modern motion and time study techniques. Taylor gave us a time and motion study. What Frank and Lillian Gilbreth did was they modified this and they found the modern motion and time study. In the area of motion studies, the Gilbreths identified 18 basic hand motions. They divided hand motions into 18 basic kinds by breaking down the task into fundamental elements. They called these elemental motions, these 18 basic hand motions, they called them as thumblicks. Thumblicks is nothing but Gilbreth spelled backwards. They named these motions as thumblicks. So in a way they found the basis of modern motion and time studies. This is the contribution of Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. The last follower of F.W. Taylor that we'll learn today is M.L. Cook, Maurice L. Cook. And Maurice L. Cook actually deviated from Taylor in some ways, but he was still a follower. He was propagating his ideas only, but he deviated in some ways. Unlike others, M.L. Cook applied the principles and techniques of scientific management to government as well as educational field. As we have already seen and discussed in our previous slides, Taylor basically focused on industries and factories, on industrial organizations. He did not deal with public organizations and other organizations, right? What M.L. Cook did was he applied the principles and techniques of scientific management to government as well as educational fields. He clearly demonstrated the fact that scientific management has a universal application. It was M.L. Cook who said that Taylor's idea should be applied universally and it had an universal application. In this way he deviated from Taylor. He also differed from Taylor in another aspect, in that he suggested the participation of workers in the process of finding the one best way. What Taylor said was finding the one best way was the sole duty of the management. The management must find out the one best way by scientific selection of work, scientific selection of workmen, and bringing together these and what all 4 principles of scientific management. This was all the prerogative of management. It was the duty of management to find the one best way. This is what Taylor said. What M.L. Cook said was participation of workers also in the process of finding one best way, whereas Taylor viewed that only experts in job analysis and not the workers can find the one best way. This is the last follower of F.W. Taylor that we'll learn today. Now I'll end this session, and in the next session I'll deal with criticism of scientific management, legacy of scientific management, neo-Taylorism, and also relevance of Taylorism, and that will be the last and the third session. So the link for the third session would be in the description of this video, so go ahead and do that, and also like, comment and share this video if you like it. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, if you do not want to miss any upcoming uploads. Hope to see you again in my next session. Peace out.